Welcome back, everybody. This week we are going to be moving forward in our studies. And last week we were working on Unit 4, and we have a couple of cleanup tasks to do, a couple of topics to cover there before we move into the next unit. But before I get into the material, I do want to point out to you, as you move into some of the subsequent chapters, you're going to start needing like graphics and stuff for like the Fish Creek and the Java Jam websites. And some of you maybe are aware of the fact that if you take your textbook and open the cover, there's a scratch-off code, and you can go to the publisher's website and download all the student files to help you build those things. But what I've done as a courtesy for you guys is on the left-hand side menu called Resources. And I just went through this morning and updated them all. Cordy kindly reminded me that they were still stuck on the 8th edition, but we're using the 9th edition of the book. So that was just updated about an hour ago.
But the images are still the same, all say downloaded.
Yeah, they are. All right, so what I've done for you is on this resources page, I've given you a link to the publisher's website where you can get all these resources. But I also went through and downloaded them all and kind of organized them for you at the same time. So let me explain what these are. The first one, the source code for in-chapter examples. So as you're doing your readings in the chapters and they have examples of code, all that code is in that zip file for the whole book. Now let me just give you a little bit of a tip. When they're showing you a technique, right, and then it comes time for you to code your own technique and you see it in the book, and sometimes by looking at the book and you're typing it in, you kind of screw up or you forget something, you can go in there and look. And you know what, folks? It's also kind of okay to copy-paste. I'm just telling you that. Coders do it all the time. But if you're looking at, let's say, we get to the chapter on tables, right? And you forget how to structure a table. You can go in there, you can grab the code from the author, and then start your table. Right? Just a way to be error-free. The other thing that I did is I took the 4 different case study paths that they have in our book, and I just want to let you know that I only assign Java Jam and Fish Creek all the way through the book. So those are the case studies you'll be working on all the way through. But there are 2 others, and the one is the Pacific Trails and the Path of Light yoga thing. And I give those up as extra credit at times or as an option. And all the images, videos, audio, and favorite icons are all inside those zip files for each of those case studies. So when you're looking for the images, like, I don't know where to get the image, well, there they are. Okay, and we're at the point now where we're starting to introduce graphics into our work, so you'll be asking that. The other thing you might choose to do is you can download all the PowerPoints for the whole book. Now I do put them individually inside each unit folder as we go, so if you don't want all of them, but if for some reason you do want all of them, for some people this is a great alternative to like reading the textbook. It's just flipping through the slides. A lot of the slides, if you haven't noticed, also, well, this slide in particular doesn't, but some of them will also have notes at the bottom, which is, information straight from the text that kind of augments what we're doing. So just please be aware that this stuff is here, and since you're in this folder, you can notice that there's other resources that I put in here too. Now, you guys, I'm going to switch out of edit mode here and kind of go into the mode that you guys see. So this is what you guys see on your screen. So I have some links to some FTP resources. My strong suggestion is no matter what platform you guys are on, please use FileZilla. However, if you are on a Macintosh, you might consider some other tools. Fetch is really a pretty cool tool for the Mac. And what I like about it, and I'm looking at my one Mac user in the class, is it really integrates beautifully with Finder. You can like just drag and drop from Finder right in. You can do that with FileZilla too, but it's a little cleaner in Fetch. It's not a free product technically. It's only free if you're a student. So make sure if you sign up for it, use your student email account. Don't use a personal one because then you won't get it free. For those that really want to do it kind of like an old-fashioned primitive way, I also have like these Windows instructions. Once again, I would shy you away from using this because it really causes a lot more problems than it solves. And usually the byproduct of it is I end up getting URLs from students that are links back to their local file system, and I just that's not a good thing. So my strong recommendation is please use FileZilla to do your FTPing. The other thing that I have in this folder are some useful links to some websites you might find useful. And there is the link to the W3 School site. There's also this cool site called HTML5 Rocks, which kind of has a lot of little tutorials and stuff. I haven't been to it in a while, frankly, so let me know if the links are messed up. And then for any of you that are interested in doing something like this, after you take this course and after you take the JavaScript course, you also need to get that piece in place. You are basically have enough skills to pass this Microsoft certification exam. And if you're interested in that, it's not a bad one to take. It costs about $100 or so to take it. And then if you pass, you get an official certificate from Microsoft, and you can put that on a resume. And it shows people that you have this basic skill level. But I have materials there for both signing up to take the certification and to prepare for it if you're so interested. I also have a thing here for what we call our VDI and VPN. We haven't really talked about that much in this course because frankly, folks, it's not really necessary. But I do put the resources out there. For those of you unaware of what these services are, VPN stands for Virtual Private Network. And when you are off campus, there are some resources in your program that you will need to access, like some of our servers, that are not publicly accessible through a regular URL. And in those cases, you have to establish what we call the VPN connection to connect to campus. So it basically simulates the fact that you're on campus so you can connect to the resources. The VDI, if you're curious, is a complete Windows 10 environment. We'll talk about that in the orientation class coming up in the next few weeks, where you have a complete Windows 10 environment available to you that's preloaded with all the software that you need for the whole program. So if you're using a Chromebook or something and you can't load Visual Studio, that's an option for you to complete your work. Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I'm going to tell you right now, at this point in time, you don't really need it, but when you get to some of the later courses, you might actually find that it's beneficial for you, especially if you have equipment that's not high performing. Let's just put it that way. It's a polite way to say it. If you are in the software program, you do a lot of work inside the VDIs and the VPNs where you have to connect to all these server resources, and it's the only way to get to them. All right. The other thing is I have the old instructions for Microsoft Office here. I think they're dated. I do plan at some point to update them. So I'll just leave that at that. And then here I kind of have this list, and this is actually an old list. So some of this I think I'm going to frankly say is deprecated, but there are some good tips. So for example, the tools that you need to do your coding. Both the Mac and Windows have built into them basic text editors. Windows has Notepad, the Macintosh has TextEdit. Those are built in to the operating system. And you can do some work in there, but I'm going to strongly suggest that you don't use those tools. I would prefer that you go to higher end tools like Notepad++ or Brackets, Text Wrangler, Sublime, and there's many others. And of course the one that I was promoting just last week was Visual Studio Code. That's a real popular one. And then yesterday one of my other instructors pointed me out to this really cool online IDE. I'm not going to show it to you today, but it does do HTML, CSS, and JavaScript beautifully right inside your browser. So if you're stuck working on a Chromebook, you have a way to actually create web content. But later in the course, we'll talk about that because it is what we consider an IDE. It's a full development environment, and you might find it beneficial for actually several of your classes. The other aspect of this class, often you have to manipulate graphics, and we're going to. This was in the Chapter 4 materials at the end of the slideshow, but what tools can you use to actually manipulate graphics? Well, built into both operating systems, again, Windows and Mac, are the default image manipulation tools. So in Windows we have Paint, and more recently Paint 3D, right? Both of those tools are just built into Windows, and for the most part you can do everything of what you need to do with graphics with those tools. And for web developers, it's usually cropping, zooming, resizing, saving to a different file format, and that's typically all you really need to do. If you were a graphic designer, you wouldn't be caught dead using those tools. You would really be switching to something more powerful like Photoshop or GIMP. But I do want to also point out that there are free online image editors, and built into your Google Apps Suite, which we were just talking about, is a product called Google Draw, which is a pretty darn good tool too, and that's built right into your Google Drive infrastructure. The other one that I like actually better than Google Drive is that one listed right there called the Pixlr Editor, and that works completely in the browser. So go to that website. They have a few different products, and I'm just going to reiterate, this is a very dated list, and I should update it. But you guys will notice that last week I gave you kind of a list of links, and I pointed you to one of our other instructors' resource pages from Wendy, where she had a whole list of resources, and her list is a little more up to date. So I hope at some point to revise this, but it's kind of legacy. Not afraid to admit it's out of date. The other thing that I have is this little link here. I'm talking about it last on purpose. I think I mentioned it last week. But you know how when you're working in a Google Drive document and we can all type in it on the same time? Well, CodeShare, and if you guys want, you can go ahead and click on the link, is basically the same equivalent for coding. So this is my CodeShare page, and if you guys follow that link, you guys will also land inside here. But if I ever like create stuff like this, right, or just like any HTML code and I type it in, at times I might come up with some examples that might take too long for you guys to type here in class, and I'll just come in here and I'll paste it into this environment. You guys can jump in, copy and paste it into your own system. So if you do log in here, you'll notice that you can get multiple people typing at the same time. It's kind of an interesting product. I've had some issues with this product though, I'll be real frank about it. Sometimes I find that it gets a little buggy and like maybe too many people are using it at the same time and it kind of slows down. But it does have color coding for just about every language. I'm trying to remember where there's the list of all the languages it color codes for. It is a really extensive list. You do see that HTML is one of them, so as soon as I turn that on, all of a sudden my code is highlighted, right? And like I said, if you follow that link in the core shell and click in there, you guys can jump into the environment and just highlight, copy, paste, and you're off and running. It also has integrated video chat and text chatting, so a lot of developers use this as kind of a tool. So I'm just kind of putting it out there as a resource you guys should be aware of. All right, enough of that. Let's move on to finishing up this Chapter 4 stuff so we can move on into the future. And where we left it with Chapter 4 was here. So I know that I did kind of lecture past this point a little bit. So I'm going to cover, I think, the topics in here that I think are important so that we have like complete coverage of this chapter, because the topics here really are important. We're going to start with this thing called, some people call it the favicon, but really it's a favorites icon. And really what this is, folks, is every time you use a browser, you notice that on your tabs there's this little icon. And if you have like a generic page, it throws up a generic icon if you don't have one declared. But it's really good practice to put one of these in, because then people can just look at the tab and recognize what that belongs to. So this one's pretty easy to see that it's a Blackboard icon. So I think this is really a very useful thing. I'm going to pause the video and get myself into work mode. So I'm going to launch all my tools, open all my folders, and I'll unpause as soon as I'm ready to go. All right, so to get a favorite icon on your screen, the code is actually pretty darn simple. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to copy exactly what they have here. And I'm not sure if I'm like not in edit mode, but this must just be a graphic is what it is. I can't copy and paste the text, darn it. So I actually have to type it. What a drag. And so I might flip back and forth a little bit. And hopefully Dreamweaver will kind of guide me here. But the link to your favorite icon does need to be placed in the head section of your document. And one thing I'm going to mention really quickly as we do this is I was grading stuff this past week, and I noticed a couple people, and this is pretty typical, the head section of the document, remember, is the non-visible part of your page. And I had a few people that were putting the H1, H2, and H3 stuff in that section. When you do a basic page, it will show up. It's when you start to do higher level things like CSS where it starts to break. So any of that stuff, all your content, remember, that is visible has to be in between the body tags. It's really an important thing. All right, so we're going to put in the link. And then what's the next little thing you do? Link, rel, right? How is it basically related to the thing? And what do I need to type in? So you guys are looking at your book. What's the relation to it? Icon, right? So you see it's on the short list there. Then I also have to put in a link to it, but you know what? I didn't put that in quite yet, did I? No, you know, I have to actually put that in my file structure. But where do I get an icon from? Believe it or not, folks, there are websites that actually generate these icons. So you see, I'm just Googling Favicon Generator. Yeah, that's my favorite one too. So you come in here, and you can actually grab a picture, right, and upload it here, and that will actually convert it. There's a couple of other tools. I've used this one before too. What's kind of neat about this one, if I can find it, okay, this isn't the tool I'm thinking of. There's one tool where you can actually go in there and pixel by pixel create it. But I'm going to suggest that you guys do this. Go to the resources page of our course shell if you want. You can unzip any one of these case studies and grab the fav icon out of there. Okay? I might just actually kind of do a little bit of fun here. Because remember I said that, you know, we're doing this like Mr. Robot thing. That's like my theme at least. And I'm going to go look at images. And then one of the actual things that you can do, oh, and see, I'm thinking that this would make a good favicon right here. The F Society face. So I'm going to click that. And then you notice they kind of put things into categories. And then one of the things you can actually do is choose size. And notice how they actually have a choice for icon right in there. Isn't that cool? So I'm going to kind of look through this list here of images and try to find what I think is going to work as an icon. I'm thinking that this one's probably one of my best bets here, so I'm going to do the right click and then save link as, and then I'm going to make sure it goes into the right folder. I'm just going to go ahead, oh wow, okay. See what it did? It didn't actually give me the icon. I have to go in here and find it. Oh, okay, that's not what I want. All right. That's not working out too well, is it? Like a lot of times you do that, and I chose save link as. I should have chose save image as, right? Some of you caught it. My brain was like two clicks behind or something. Normally, you know, you would put images in your images folder, but with the favorites icon, I tend to put it in the root of my project, and I'm just going to call it, well, this is a JPEG, so I don't want to destroy the file extension, but I'm going to just call it Favicon, right? And then I'm just going to go ahead and do a save. Now, really, a lot of what happens here is you notice that these favorite icons typically have a file extension of ICO, so a lot of people will upload them to these websites, like the ones that I've looked at. And I'm actually going to go back to the first one we were on, this one here, and then I'm going to find that icon in my file structure. There it is. I'm going to open it. Yeah, see, it's telling me it's not good. You know what? I don't care if it says it's not good, I'm just going to use it as is. But normally I would go through the conversion process here, so no, should I go back and, okay, fine, I'll find one that's right. Now I kind of feel obliged to like kind of follow through with the whole thing. All right, so now I'm looking for something that's a little bigger. You know what? This one might actually work pretty well too. And if you watch the show, you know what these references are to. So I'm going to go ahead and download this one. That name's like way too long and clunky. I'm just going to call it eCorp logo. Save it, and let's try uploading that one now to the website. This one should work because it's a little bit larger, so apparently the service likes them to be larger before it does the conversion. I'm just going to continue with this picture. And boy, they really changed this site. See, like they want you to click on all this stuff. So. So what I need to do basically is figure out which version I want to create. So yeah, so they are offering you to place it at a site. So it says right here, I will place the favicon files at the root of my website, recommended. That's what I'm going to do, which is what I think. So I'm going to go ahead and click the button to generate it, and it's going to send me a download. And then it's going to give me the code I need to make it work. And now this is kind of interesting because I want you to notice that they're giving me more than one option here, right? They're giving me like a whole boatload of stuff. And what this is telling you is really when you're doing these icons, there's different ones you want to use for different platforms. I'm not really too worried about that right now. We're just going to do kind of like the generic approach. And so what I'm looking for here is the generic one that's listed here. And for me, that's probably one of these. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm trying to see where the download is for this. Do you guys see the download link here? Oh, did it download automatically? Oh, right here. Download your package, Favicon package. So let's download that. They couldn't make the button more obvious. It's just I'm not seeing it. So, but that tells you something a little bit about web design too, folks. So I'm waiting for that to become a confirmed download right now. Yeah, and then, you know, one thing I don't like about these services is that they do give you like a whole boatload of files that we really kind of like don't need. So what I'm going to just pick one in particular, and that is this one, right? So I'm just going to, I am going to extract them all from the zip, but the one that I'm going to choose is that one that's just called Favicon. So look at what it did for me. Isn't that beautiful? It created all those icons. But I'm just going to choose the single one here, copy it, and then I'm going to go over to my file folder where my work is located here, and then I'm going to paste it in. And then I can go ahead and just use the link that was pre-created, like in the PowerPoint, and then basically we just do this, right? We just put it in our href, and I can actually browse. And I can just choose it directly. And then you'll also notice that the book throws in this extra little bit of code. And that's considered good practice. You'll notice that the sample code that they provide on the website, though, I'm trying to get back to the website, kind of gives you a little bit of a different approach here. You guys notice that? And they're pointing to different things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the book approach, and I'm going to include type image /X icon. I'm going to include all of that in mine. So I'm going to type type Now, I'm going to just make a little comment about that because I'm typing it in for a reason. That last little tidbit, frankly, you can get away without it. The author considers it good practice, so if you want to put it in, put it in. I'm also, because I want all my pages to look consistent, I'm going to copy this into my About page. Yeah, it did. But the problem that we get is sometimes we get non-compliant browsers, and it kind of causes some issues. Now that I have it pasted into all the pages, I'm going to go up to my File menu and choose Save All. And then I'm going to take a look at my page in the browser. So I'm going to do a preview here. And my software is kind of choking here, and I think it's because I'm doing an online screen share right now. So I'm actually going to go back to my file folder to launch the page. Let's go ahead and launch the index page. And then with all luck, notice now I have the little icon up there. Doesn't that look cool? Now the advantage of that, of course, is when you have a lot of tabs open, that's the first thing that people see, and that will attribute, like, whatever your logo or branding is, or your color. You know, like if I was the Green Bay Packers, I might have a little G up there. It just shows you people really quickly what's attributed to your site. So that's how you do a favicon, or favorites icon, folks. So that's considered a good practice, and that's something you want to include on your personal sites. All right, I'm going to move on in Chapter 4 and demonstrate a couple more techniques that they have here. And I'm going to go to the rounded corners area on slide number 44. And this is kind of a neat thing, because you've seen lately with a lot of objects that we've been creating that everything has like a square look to it. And sometimes that's not what you want to accomplish. And this technique that they're demonstrating here, the border radius, is one that you can kind of selectively apply to objects. I'm not going to actually type this in right now because I don't have like a really good object to do it with, but I just want to show you the technique very specifically. So the command on this is border radius, and then in pixels you designate what the radius is of the sweep. So if I do a 15 pixel border radius, it sets a radius and draws a circle at the corner. And because you can actually do selective border radii on this, you can actually make one single command that applies to all four corners. Or you can do like the hotwire approach, remember, top right, bottom left, and do a separate one on each corner. So you see they do 15 pixels, 30 pixels, 100 pixels, 5 pixels, it barely even rounds it, it almost looks square. And that's something you can also apply selectively. So I could use a command that said like border radius top right or whatever, and it would do it that way. And what I would recommend is that you use this approach if you're doing different ones, but it can be a really nice technique for making certain things on your screen look a little more pleasing. I'm just going to give you a really quick little example by going out to the web really quick and showing you examples of ones that I think are kind of pleasing. Take a look at Google search box, right? Notice how that's rounded over like that? Notice even the buttons here are rounded over. Or like if you go to log into Facebook, take a look at their form entries here. And I'm going to zoom in kind of significantly here to take a look. That's maybe a little excessive, but take a look at their text boxes here where you type in your name and stuff. Notice how those are rounded over. And I think it does create a nice, softer look to the eye. And you know, there's aesthetics to this whole thing. You know, it's not something you have to do, but it's something you might opt to do to make some things look a little more pleasing. So I'm going to zoom out again. The other one that I think is kind of fascinating is this one. And you notice how they're giving a box shadow to an object. So let me talk about box shadow. It's very similar to what we did with text shadow. So remember when I put like shadowing on the text to give it kind of like a dimensional look? The parameter calls are basically the same. So like I think it's X offset, Y offset, how much it blurs in pixels, and then the color of the blur. So you can actually apply that shadowing technique to objects like this. So they actually give you a rounded off image here. And actually they're not applying it to that image. Notice where they're applying it is to the whole wrapper. And I think that actually kind of looks kind of slick. So I'm going to try that on my page. I'm going to put that on this box that sits around the edges. Now, one problem that I have is my background's kind of dark, but by putting a box shadow on this, I can actually make it look like it's popping forward from the page a little bit. And then if you ever notice, like any windows that you have on your screen inside of Windows or the Mac OS, like I'll just bring up like a file folder window. If you look really closely at the edge of this window, like where the edge of the window is relative to the other window, there's a little bit of a shadow. So like operating system developers do this too. And the reason they do that is it helps show you which window is sitting in front of the other. Take a look at the very bottom of this box here as it hovers over this white area. You see the shadowing effect? That's basically the same thing I'm going to try to do with my wrapper. So I'm going to go to my CSS, and somewhere here I think I may have already applied styles to the wrapper, or have I not? I guess I haven't. All right, so now we're, I could have swore we did though. Oh, here it is, right down here. And see, for me, that's not a logical place for it to be placed. For me, the wrapper kind of sits around the whole document. So I'm actually going to grab this piece and move it up to the top of my CSS, right below the body, and put it here, just so I can find it faster. That's where I expect it to be. And I'm going to add to it the same thing that they just did, which is box shadow. And then I'm going to kind of mimic their approach, except I'm going to use slightly larger values. So I'm going to use 7 pixels, 7 pixels, 7 pixels, and then I'm going to choose kind of a gray-ish color. And you know, I'm thinking, I'm thinking here, like what color am I, I'm just going to type in the keyword gray, so I don't have to go like looking for the color code. And I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to go back to my browser and do a refresh. Now watch the edges of the screen after I do the refresh, particularly on the right side. Do you guys see the change? Yeah, there's a little bit of a shadow there. It's not very significant, and I chose gray on purpose because the background's kind of dark. If I had like a really light background, I would go with a dark shadow, but it kind of creates a little bit of an effect. The other thing I could do is, if you guys want to see like border radius in effect, I could do a border radius right here, like, and it'll go on the corners of the wrapper. I'll just do the same amount that the author did, of 15 pixels. Let's save that and take a look. So watch the corners of the box as I refresh. Yeah. Now I'm going to tell you what, I used to think that was the coolest technique, and now I kind of look at it and go, I don't know. I'm just going to be real frank about it. You know, it's kind of a matter of opinion. The Mr. Robot logo could probably use some of those effects too, honestly. But I want you to pick the effects that you choose and where to place them. What is useful about that effect, though, is it does create a dimension. The shadow creates a dimension that makes it look like it's just coming forward a little bit from the other objects. The corners, you know, rounded, soften things a little bit, and generally speaking, that's a little more pleasing to the eye. But I think there's a time and place for it. I think sometimes square is fine. I think sometimes rounded is appropriate. It's really kind of up to you to kind of figure that out. But please experiment with it so you see how it works. You can take these effects too far, by the way. You can choose the wrong colors for the shadows. You can choose shadows that are way too big for their own good. And border radiuses that do crazy, crazy things. All right. Almost done with chapter 4 here. I think that might be a thing that you guys are interested in. But let's also throw this into effect. And I want you to notice this technique. This is a really cool technique, folks. Notice that this H1, which sits in a box and has a background color, is sitting on top of a background that's got an image. And by adding this little switch here, or style, excuse me, called opacity. You guys know what opacity is? It's the amount of see-through. And you can set it between a range of 0 and 1, with 0 being completely see-through. You wouldn't even see the object, so what's the point? Or 1, which is 100%, that you can't see through it. But usually if you're using opacity, you go somewhere in the middle. This one's set to 0.6, and what happens is now I can kind of see through the background to the image behind it. And I think that can be a great effect. I'm going to temporarily, and I say temporarily, apply that to my wrapper. So I'm going to apply opacity, and then I'm going to just go right in the middle. I'm just going to do a 0.5. Oops. And instead of hitting Control S, I hit Control Z, my mistake, if you're wondering what happened. So Control S to save. Let's go back to the browser and see what monstrosity I've created. And that didn't work. I wonder why. I must have screwed something up here. I'm going to move the opacity command to up here because I have a idea that it's kind of conflicting a little bit with some of the other stuff I'm doing. So this is just an experiment, folks. One more time. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working in this capacity. So that's not really a good example. And I'm thinking it's because of how I've got my code structured. So they chose a background color and then set the opacity. Background color and opacity. So I'm not, did I spell opacity incorrectly? No, because my editor would show me that it's wrong. I'm just wondering if some of these other functions might be interfering. So you do have that effect sometimes with CSS. So I'm just blocking those out on purpose right now because I have the suspicion that they're interfering. So this is something that you might not figure out on your own like that, but see if it works now. Nope. Now I'm doing a hard refresh, Control F5, still not doing it. And okay, so now I think I know why. Let me see if my suspicion is correct. Let me go back to my code. Oh. You guys see what I did? Yeah, I put pixels after opacity. No, makes no sense. All right. So even the best of us make mistakes. Notice what I didn't do is panic. All right, there we go. Now I can see through it. That looks hideous. But it does demonstrate what you can do. So that opacity setting is actually a bit much. That's like 50% see-through. So I might go more like a 0.75 and refresh. And now you can kind of see through it. I still don't think it looks good. I'm just saying, you know. So you got to be really selective about how you choose these things. It can make for a really cool effect depending on how you're layering stuff, but it's very subjective to whatever your content is. So in this case, I mean, if I was to keep using the opacity, I'd probably go even higher. I'd probably go like 0.85 might be a setting that I could live with, where we get a little bit of transparency, just a little bit, right? But I can still read the words. And you have to think about that kind of thing when people are looking at your site. If it's hard to read the words, why are the words even on the page, right? So, all right. So now that I know that I was just screwing up my code, I can remove the comments on this section because I know they're not interfering. And now I can have like the whole rounded corners, a shadow, and see-through all at the same time. Be careful about how you apply these techniques though, folks. Just fair warning. Not always does it look good, but it's okay to experiment. All right, back to the slideshow. I want to show a different way to do opacity and a different way to do color. We learned so far that you can apply color by using a hex code or a name. I also told you that another technique is what we call RGB. So if I go, let's say to like Google's color picker, for example, I'm just going to type color picker, and the Google one is fine. And then whatever color I happen to pick, so you know, let's say I pick that color right there. Notice that one of the codes available is RGB. Okay, so I'm just going to experiment with this. I'm going to grab that color code, and I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to try to figure out something that might look good with that color before I actually go applying it. Maybe our democracy has been hacked might work. Okay, so I'm going to choose those letters. Okay, and that is, I believe, an H2. How do I figure out where that is? Oh, I got to look at my code, right? So I'm going to go back to the index page here, and it says our democracy has been hacked. It is an H2. But you know what? I don't want to apply it to all H2s. I just want to apply it to this one. So I'm going to put a class identifier on it and call it, I don't know, hacked. Okay. Then I'm going to double click that word to highlight it. I just did a Control-C to copy. Go back to my style sheet, and I'm going to add a style right here. Because it's a class, I start with a period. Paste in the name so I don't make any mistakes. And then I'm going to go ahead and apply a color to it. So I'm just going to color the font. And instead of doing a hex or choosing one of these pre-colored name things, I'm going to use the RGB format, right? And then I'm going to paste in those values that I grabbed from the color picker, which I now have no longer selected. So come back to copy. Oops, let's copy that again. Come back and paste those values in. So this works very much like the hex code, but instead of doing 3 hexadecimal pairs like 0 through F, remember like the counting system, this actually just uses numbers from 0 to 256 in each position to indicate, once again, red, green, blue. All right, so that's one way to add color that's unique. And I'll tell you what, this is my favorite way to add color now is RGB. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Once we actually do a refresh on our page here, you'll see that the font color hypothetically should change. Yeah, well, you know, the problem is I saved my CSS, I didn't save my code here. Yeah. So save. Now refresh. Refresh. I'm waiting. Okay, there it is. I was being very impatient, so it refreshes. So now that's blue. Okay. Here's another thing that you can do that's kind of interesting. Right now, the way that we're coloring the wrapper background to make it opaque is I'm doing a background color and then I'm calling for opacity. Okay? There's actually an alternate way to do this, and that's my preferred way to do it is the way that I'm about to show you. So I'm going to blot out the opacity, and then I'm also going to take this color code that we have here. I'm going to go back to that color picker in the browser, and I'm actually going to see if I can, I don't know if it allows me to paste it in there. It sure does, right? So that's my color, but I don't want to use hex. I want to use RGB. So I'm going to grab RGB, the values. I'm going to convert this to an RGB statement, all right, and paste those in. So I'm going to get the same color. It's just declared in a different format. The beauty of RGB is this. If I want to apply opacity, I can add what they call RGBA. The A stands for alpha, which is kind of a fancy graphics way of saying opacity. And then you add that a fourth value, which is the opacity. So we already kind of figured out that 0.85 looks good, right? But just to prove that it's actually working, let's set it for something that's not good, like too transparent, just to show that it's working. So I'm going to save that, and now when I go back to the browser and do a refresh, watch the page. See? So I know it worked. It's a little too transparent, but I did that on purpose to make sure it's working. So now I can go back and switch that to the 0.85 that I already determined. I might go, well, 0.87, I want to be really picky. And then do a refresh again and get the page kind of back to where it was. It is transparent. You can still kind of see through it, right? But I think right now it's like tastefully transparent and not silly transparent. Because if you're using transparency to get an effect, but it's destroying your content in the process, it's no good, folks. But you notice what I can do is by choosing RGB, all I have to do to add opacity to it is add the A, add the fourth value, which is a percentage of how see-through it is. And that can be a really useful effect. Okay? So that's doing RGBA. And like I said, the A stands for alpha, which is a fancy way of saying opacity in graphics terms. And for me, RGB is the best color picking approach for modern web development, because all it takes for opacity is you add. Notice that they had a couple of other coloring systems. And here's the fascinating thing about this is HSL is also supported by HTML. I'm not a huge fan of it, and I think it stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. Or maybe it's luminance, I forget. But those are different values. I think it's a lot trickier to use, and the only way you can really get those or memorize that system is by using a tool like this or going to Photoshop and extracting the values. The Cmyk values, if you're curious, those are ones that are intended for print, not for screen. Screens do RGB, print is done with cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. That's how they do it for print. That's how they develop for full color documents. In fact, next time you guys pick up a product, like a cereal box, if you ever look at like the sides or like maybe under the flap when you open the box, they always have like test prints of like cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, like little circles to make sure the colors are right, so they know their print is working okay. So that's kind of a fascinating little thing. So they have these alternate systems that you can use. I am not a huge fan of this one for web, although I do see some people using it. All right, let's talk about this very last thing now, and that is what we call a gradient. And in order to demonstrate this best, I'm going to show you what I used to do in the old days. First of all, okay, Photoshop is in the process of launching, but I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here for a second. And then I want you to take a really quick look at this little web page that they have here. In fact, I can just make the image bigger so you can see the effect. So take a look at the page they created. The background behind the wrapper is what we call a gradient color, right? It goes from white or really light blue at the top, and as it scrolls down the page, it becomes darker. In the old days, to get that effect, what we would do is we would go into a program like Photoshop, and I would make a really narrow, super tall image, and I would create the gradient with the tools inside of Photoshop. It has tools that do it. So I'll show you what I used to do. This was my old school technique. Is I'd come in here, I'd make a new document or new image, and I would make it super narrow, like maybe 10 pixels, and super tall, like maybe 2,000 pixels. I would make the background color white, probably. And so here's the image I created. It looks really silly, right? And then I would choose what they call the gradient tool. This is the gradient tool, and then I would select two colors. I would pick maybe like a real light blue, and then I would choose my secondary color would be, you know, a darker, real dark blue like that. And then I would take this gradient tool and maybe would zoom in a couple clicks. Maybe that's too far already. All right, because I have to have the whole thing on screen. And once I have that tool selected, I just draw like this over it, and it creates, see how it creates that effect? Then I would save that as an image, put it in as a background. It would automatically set it up to repeat on the x-axis, and I would get the effect. How cumbersome, right? Because I'm loading another graphic, for one thing, which takes a lot of file size. Not a really practical technique. So what they came up with the CSS3 standard, when that became the standard, is they have the capability of actually creating the gradients mathematically right inside of the browser. And it's a lot more efficient than loading a graphic. And here's just an example. To get the effect that you see here, they're going from white, that's all Fs, to that blue, which is this color. And the command is background image, linear gradient, and then you just declare it. You can actually apply gradients to other objects. There's a whole field of study that goes with this, but I just want to point out that it's a possibility if you want to get a background like that. You don't have to do it with a graphic, you can do it with code. Okay? That's a technique you might want to experiment with. I think that technique actually kind of does look pretty good, depending on the kind of website you're doing, but you want to be really careful with backgrounds depending on the kind of site you're working with. Some backgrounds, like if I was doing a business site, there's no way I would do a background like that. It's not appropriate. What do people really care what the background is? They just want to get the work done, If maybe you're trying to push a product or something, you want to create an effect, and you have people go ooh and ah, then you might want to choose to do it. I look at background gradients now as kind of cheesy, personally, but there is a place for everything. It's just a matter of how it's applied. Sometimes you learn techniques and they're kind of dated, and it makes your website look dated. So I think that this is kind of a dated technique. This is what we call a linear gradient because it's a straight line. A radial gradient is one that fans out from the middle, so you have a middle color and it goes to a lighter color on the sides. That can be a cool effect too. Experiment with it. And to try the difference, all you have to do is change the word linear to radial, and you'll see the effect. The only place I would really use that is either in a background, like what they have here, or maybe if you have an object that's got a background, that can look kind of cool there too. So one common technique I see with some people is they'll create buttons, and then the buttons will have a radial background, where it'll be darker in the middle or lighter in the middle, and it gets darker as it goes out. It just creates a little bit of dimension, basically. All right, folks, that's the end of chapter 4. We are now going to take a break.